all parts of Ireland. We stand together as a representative group in solidarity for a peaceful demonstration in memory of our loved ones who have died in tragic circumstances as a consequence of a system of care that has failed them. We bring the pain and suffering we endure daily with us here today to request our government to please put legislation in place to safeguard those in need. Yesterday, in the late afternoon, we received an email from Minister Mary Butler, Minister of State in the Department of Health with responsibility for mental health and older people. Our Minister for Older People can only commit to reviewing the proposal next year. It is a very disappointing response and reinforces the lack of political will to tackle the clear safeguarding and human rights needs for those who live in care in Ireland. Care champions have also been refused a meeting, both by An Taoiseach Leo Varadkar and Minister Mary Butler. I would now like to call on Emer Fitzgerald to read our opening statement, please.
Care Champions is a family-led, voluntary advocacy group. We advocate for quality and safe care with appropriate safeguards for people in their own homes, in hospitals, in daycare and residential care settings. Most importantly, we advocate that people who receive care and their families are treated as partners in the care process, and that their experience will inform how the state delivers services and responds when things go wrong. So we are family members, residents and staff who have lived the daily lives and the daily experiences of these government policies and decisions in the care sector. We see these policies in action, and to date we have supported over 8,000 families and 200 care staff with their concerns. Our experience in Wave 1 is very sadly reflected in Waves 2, 3 and 4. And many of you will be familiar with our families who participated in RT Investigates, Prime Time and other media outlets to share their stories. In Wave 1, people died without medical care, support and in crisis. In many homes, it appeared there was no debriefing or planning following these awful scenarios. And the same mistakes went on and on from one wave to the next. Residents were denied hospital transfers, essential services were stopped, and people spent prolonged periods in isolation in their rooms, cut off from those that they loved. This had an enormous impact on every resident, but most importantly, those with dementia. During outbreaks, when staff were sick with COVID and staff numbers were low, despite residents telling families that they were not receiving care or hydration, families remained locked out. Residents were denied access to those they loved, often in the days leading to their deaths. Our families are traumatized with questions like, were they in pain? Do they know they were loved? Were they alone? Did they get appropriate medication and care? Families who raised concerns were often threatened with eviction, which on occasions did happen. The most common concerns that families raised were things like weight loss. Older people were left unwashed for weeks in inappropriate clothing, lack of nutrition, hydration, and obvious signs of neglect. Residents were sad, lonely, in tears, and in many homes they were even denied window visits. They were denied the right to look out a closed window at the people they loved for months, despite the fact that that posed no risk to residents, staff, or family. In many facilities, window visits were only permitted at specific times. Many families were denied visits, even at the end of life, when government guidelines always allowed for compassionate visits. Our families and residents struggled to find compassion. Residents who lived on upper floors in nursing homes often saw a wife or husband standing in the snow and rain below, waving up to them. This happened years into the pandemic, as the rest of society was even starting to reopen. Many residents didn't get fresh air for months on end. Family members on the outside were also struggling, concerned and raising concerns of the toll it was taking on their loved ones, and found that the complaints system is not fit for purpose. HICWA doesn't deal with individual concerns, the Ombudsman doesn't deal with clinical concerns, and the Office of the Confidential Recipient only deals with HSE services. But 80% of our nursing homes are in the private sector. The HSE safeguarding policy does not extend to private nursing homes. When residents and families had concerns of neglect or abuse, we found that safeguarding social workers do not have the legal right of entry into a nursing home to investigate concerns. We found that there was very often a lack of communication skills in An Garda Síochána in interviewing somebody with additional cognitive or verbal needs, when criminal charges of abuse were under investigation. Government continued to produce discretionary visiting guidance, which some homes chose to use, many more refused to. Our families and residents were told by many private nursing homes that the government only produced guidance. Nursing homes were not legally obliged to support the visiting proposed by public health teams. We contacted HICWA, the Ombudsman, safeguarding and protection social workers.
No good.
The efforts families had, and at times still have to go through, was exhausting. The expert panel on nursing home, which was set up in response to COVID, was led by doctors, and a patient representative who was in fact a former nurse. There was no safeguarding, human rights, or service user representative. Despite the accepted weaknesses in our safeguarding of nursing homes, there has not been a single safeguarding recommendation. Residents and families quickly learned that when harm is experienced, there is no one-stop shop or effective response. Our families continue to share their experiences of infringements of rights, abuse, neglect, and unnecessary separation from residents in the past 3 years. The lack of political will has failed people, and we must ensure that the voice of residents is always heard. Ireland is ageist, and not to see the person who is and who was very much a loved person in their family and in the community. Our asks, which we believe need to be implemented immediately, are in no particular order. Care partner. In summer 2020, some countries saw the detrimental impact of isolation in residents and brought in a process of safe visiting, which did not increase transmission. In November 2020, the Northern Ireland Executive endorsed a care partner system. This allowed two family members to always have access to their loved one. That care partner was tested with staff, and in fact it took the pressure off staff as they were supporting their loved one in the activities of daily living. We today still have people standing at windows, waving to their loved ones. Another of our asks, mandatory reporting. This means that staff will be legally obliged to report abuse and neglect of older people or people with disabilities if they observe or suspect it in the course of their work. These laws are in place for children, and adults at risk of abuse deserve the same protection. Care champions have supported at least 200 staff members, staff who were silenced, punished, and suffered huge personal loss for doing the right thing. We need to change the culture. Complaints should be seen as a learning, an opportunity, not a slap on the hand, and staff must be protected in raising those concerns. Safeguarding legislation. We have no adult safeguarding laws in Ireland. Despite it being worked on for many years in Eireann, in the absence of law, people have been failed and have been heinously harmed. Today, we remember the lady known as Emily, who not only brought her abuser to justice, but saved others Families who were misled that their loved ones were well, they didn't have COVID, were very often denied window visits, and they need to know who was there. Did they see a doctor? Were they in pain? And did they know again that they were loved? Were the medications given? Families have been left fractured and must be provided with full, transparent truth in a process, and we continue to call for a human rights-led inquiry. This human rights-led inquiry, we believe we should not accept anything less than a judge-led, human rights-based inquiry.
Hear, hear.
Where the victims will be at its heart. It's only investigating what was done well and what was done poorly that we can learn for the future. These are our calls to action. Care champions are clear. Nothing will change until the law is changed. And it's also clear that political will and action will only take place if sufficient media attention and public pressure is brought to bear. Thank you. I pass you back to Regina.
For me, COVID-19 has made visible political, structural and societal age discrimination and ageism, and widespread public and policy ambivalence towards older people and people living with disabilities who need support from health and social care services. The Irish Association of Social Workers stands in solidarity with care champions and everyone here today, and we fully support the calls for a care partner scheme, mandatory reporting in care settings, adult safeguarding legislation, a truth-telling process and a human rights-led inquiry. Care home residents experienced multiple human rights violations over the course of the pandemic. Probably the biggest infringement would fall under Article 8 of the European Convention of Human Rights, the right to a private and family life. Moving into a nursing home can be one of the most difficult decisions a person will ever have to make in their life, and for many they both want and need the support of their family and loved ones to continue to provide vital care and support, or in other words, to be their care partner. Family visits are a vital protection for residents in a poorly regulated system with weak safeguards like we have here in Ireland. During the pandemic, strict restrictions on visits to nursing homes were imposed with significant failures to facilitate communication between nursing home residents and their beloved family members. These violations included failure to facilitate visits in critical and compassionate circumstances, restriction on the facilitation of window visits in terms of the number of visits permitted, the frequency of visits and the length of visits, but also failure to facilitate residents to even have phone calls or virtual visits with their loved ones. Residents were essentially cocooned into nursing homes without the protective eyes and love of their family members. They had no way to speak out about abuse if it was happening. Again, many of our nursing home residents suffered significant deterioration both to their physical and their mental health and well-being, and as a result of this have devastating longer-term impacts. The state very much failed to safeguard nursing home residents at a time when they were at their most vulnerable. As Emer said, we have a weak safeguarding system here in Ireland. There is a very low awareness of safeguarding and protection teams generally, and people don't know where to report abuse to. And currently, social workers do not have a legal right of entry to private nursing homes to carry out safeguarding investigations. Even in HSE-run facilities, as we saw in the Emily case, when residents do speak out because of their age, delirium or dementia, they're viewed through a medical lens and the reports of abuse were not believed or acted on. The closed organisational culture in some nursing homes makes it exceptionally challenging for staff to speak up and report abuse. In these situations and in these contexts, mandatory reporting of abuse is absolutely critical. The pandemic should mark a turning point in making some meaningful changes to effectively safeguard those adults at risk in our society, as well as those of us or our loved ones who might become more dependent or at risk in the future. All of us deserve basic protection, care and reassurance when we most need it, and currently we don't have that. Nursing homes are part of our wider health and social care system and should be an integral part of our societies and our communities. However, their lack of connection and lack of integration into local communities, the absence of basic legal protections for residents, the profit-driven nature of much of our care home sector, and the general invisibility of nursing homes in the public consciousness combine to exacerbate the vulnerability of residents living there. The time for hand-wringing and solemn apologies has passed. Our government must act and introduce comprehensive legislation to safeguard adults at risk from abuse and neglect. Our Constitution commits to guarantee equality of all citizens before the law, but currently all citizens are not afforded equality of safety and protection. The Irish Association of Social Workers and others have repeatedly informed government of the avoidable abuse and neglect of adults witnessed by frontline social workers in the gap of political action. We urgently need the introduction of adult safeguarding legislation which both empowers, supports and protects adults at risk of abuse and neglect. Right. The Irish Association of Social Workers has called for expediency in these processes, as in the absence of action, adults continue to experience preventable abuse and neglect. However, while waiting the introduction of adult safeguarding legislation, emergency measures must be introduced, which include mandatory reporting of all abuse and neglect of adults in care settings and a care partner scheme. If we truly value adults in our society, we should legislate for this and protect the right to a private and family life. The pandemic raised many uncomfortable questions about our care for and ability to protect nursing home residents. However, there's been little evidence of any meaningful improvement in the protection of residents' human rights post-pandemic. This suggests, at the very least, a complete indifference to those human rights. The continued government tolerance for long delays in the development of legislation and the failure to introduce emergency measures and the care partner scheme really speaks volumes about the value they place in this issue. Our government must and can do better. The Northern Ireland government introduced the care partner scheme in November 2020 as they understood that family life provides essential love, support and protection to residents. 3 years later, the Irish government are still considering this. The pandemic has also showed us, however, that health is much more than just our physical well-being or our medical status. Our health includes our mental and our social well-being, our relationships, our social connections with our families and our communities, which we must attend and take care of. A care partner scheme helps to ensure that vital connection and that ability to protect by family members. We must all really realise that any of us at any time may have a loved one who needs care or support in a nursing home, in an acute hospital, in a residential setting, or indeed we may ourselves need care and support. It merits a collective outcry from all of society and demand for meaningful change, not only for current nursing home residents and those who lived there before, but for our future older selves. Thank you very much.
Dreams that you
Thank you, Suzanne, for giving your services free today. I'd like to just give you a few flowers in appreciation. Thank you so much. My name is Regina Nolan, and the Care Champions Ask that I'm focusing on today is the truth-telling process, or transparency. Families must be provided with access to all records and each receive an individual truth-telling process. I speak today not just for my own late father, but I represent the families across the country, bereaved families, families of residents who have experienced harm or abuse or neglect, and who received an unsatisfactory response from the state when these concerns were raised. Today we come together under the umbrella of Care Champions to highlight the inhumanity our loved ones have experienced. The stories from the pandemic are not just numbers or old or vulnerable people. They are our fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, brothers and sisters. They were failed and they suffered unnecessarily. They mattered, and we're here to say we will not let them be forgotten. We will be their voices. Our families are now fractured. We will never recover, not just from the loss or the harm our loved ones experienced, but from the callous indifference we experience when we reach out to our government asking for their assistance. We need to know what happened. We need the truth. We need to make sure it never happens again. As we stand here today, there will be homes and hospitals across the country closed to families. Where are the lessons? Where is the reform? In memory of our loved ones who suffered neglect, substandard care, isolation, loneliness, and often died alone, we demand this never happens again. We call on the Taoiseach and ministers today to urgently implement care partner and mandatory reporting. Residents can never again be denied access to those they love. They must have safe and accountable homes. When things go wrong, there needs to be a person-centred system that will deal with it through a human rights lens. For the families of the harmed and bereaved, we call on the government to ensure we are provided with a full and transparent individual truth-telling process. We must have answers, and we need the truth and justice now. I would now call on Karen Heffernan to speak in regard to Care Partner, please.
My name is Karen Heffernan, and I'm focusing on the Care Champions Ask for Care Partner. A Care Partner scheme ensures that a family member is trained to safely visit the resident at all times, including during outbreaks. It has been safely used across Europe since 2020. We demand the same scheme for residents in the south. Why are government not listening? What is the point of a Minister for Older Person who does not listen to older people or ensure that their rights are respected? I represent my mother, who cannot be here today. She's living in reality of the long-term impact of prolonged isolation in care homes. During the time of enforced isolation, she lost the ability to understand why. I, as her daughter, who visit her daily, seemingly refused to go to her in person. A dramatic deterioration in her physical appearance could be seen. She became depressed, anxious, fearful, tearful, and could not understand what she had done wrong. My mother now lives in constant fear of isolation and separation from her family. We still cannot promise Ma'am that she will never be separated from us again. This is her constant fear and dread. If the government had acted and introduced a care partner, she could live with confidence and dignity, knowing her rights as an older citizen of Ireland are respected and understood. It's heartbreaking to see that all this suffering, no lessons have been heeded and no reform has taken place. In these circumstances, where implemented in any other section of society, it would be called out as ageism and abuse. We acknowledge the crude protocols implemented initially where an adequate response was required. However, these responses were not adequately reviewed, despite numerous professional groups offering solutions which would ensure that the rights and the safety of the resident was respected. In November 2020, the Northern Ireland Executive endorsed Care Partner as a result of constant consultation with family members in all care settings. Their voices, unlike heirs and care champions, were heeded. Thank you.
Hannon, please.
Hello. I will focus on the Care Champions ask for mandatory reporting related to safeguarding vulnerable adults in Irish health and social care settings. Ireland urgently needs adult safeguarding laws to ensure all healthcare workers are mandated, trained and supported to recognise and report cases of adult safeguarding incidents. While healthcare workers have a moral obligation under duty of care, we are not legally mandated to report safeguarding incidents. This is in place for children since 2017, but not for vulnerable adults in Ireland. Nothing will change until the law changes. As well as changing the laws, however, we also need to change the culture within the Irish healthcare system to encourage and support those who speak out. Currently, 40% of those working in healthcare are penalised after raising concerns in Ireland. That's a Transparency Ireland report from 2020. Personally, I am a COVID whistleblower from St Mary's Hospital in the Phoenix Park. I am also one of nearly 200 staff whistleblowers supported by Care Champions. As staff, we could not stand idly by as we witnessed policy breaches, wrongdoing, substandard care or neglect of vulnerable adults. In raising these concerns, we were silenced, punished and found the Irish protected disclosure system unfit for purpose. Many of us were forced out of our jobs and endured enormous and ongoing emotional, personal and financial costs. In supporting the need for mandatory reporting, it is hugely important that our lived experience shapes the process of ensuring that staff are protected when speaking out. We believe there needs to be training of healthcare management staff to deal with speak up incidents. We urgently need a truly independent system in place where staff can raise concerns safely, anonymously and effectively without fear of reprisal, for the betterment of service users as well as staff working within the Irish healthcare system. And today we stand in solidarity with families in calling for mandatory reporting. Thank you.
Of many possible very successful demonstrations today, we invite our political representatives forward who may like to say a word. Again, at this point, I would like to reiterate our disappointment that our Taoiseach and Minister Burke are not here to listen to the story today.
I want to thank very much, first of all, Care Champions for the dignified campaign that you have been involved in over the last number of years, and for this dignified demonstration here outside of the Dáil. It is the sign of any nation how it treats those who are most vulnerable. And in terms of care, this country is radically failing at the moment. Care at all levels, care of the older people, care of young people, and also care of children in need. There's an absolute crisis happening in terms of care throughout this country. And what happened during COVID was an absolute disgrace. And actually, I would say what happened during COVID and what is still happening was state-sponsored abuse and state-sponsored neglect of the most vulnerable people living in this country. I can think of one such case in my own county, a heartbreaking county, a woman by the name of Mary Bartley Meehan, who had a son and a husband in a nursing home during COVID. was unable to visit as she needed to. Her husband had cancer. He had a tumour on his face. Because of the lack of care they received, his nails grew longer. He scratched his tumour until it became open, and I hate saying this, but maggots then appeared on the face of that man before he died. And her son died in that nursing home, and she hasn't received justice from the HSE in relation to what happened to that woman. And it's absolutely incredible, the chaos that was in the middle of government during that whole period. The government shifted thousands of people from hospitals into nursing homes without testing them for COVID. They seeded COVID in nursing homes right throughout this country. The most exposed were the most vulnerable in Irish society. 2,500 people lost their loved ones there. We had situations where carers had to go on to Facebook looking for help to care for the people in nursing homes. They had to go onto local radio. 2 carers minded a whole nursing home of people with COVID in Galway for 48 hours. And yet the Minister for Health at the time wouldn't meet with people in Nursing Home Ireland or the staff in nursing homes whatsoever. We had a situation where the HSE was taking protective gear and clothing away from nursing homes and bringing it into the HSE, taking badly needed resources from those nursing homes and putting it into the HSE. It's an absolute disgrace what happened. And we see ourselves in Ireland as having great values. The Irish people had great values in terms of caring for the most vulnerable. We had great values in terms of bringing people in their journey of death and then supporting families after they had lost loved ones. But those 2 incredible values were gutted by official Ireland during COVID and have remained so. And we in Aontú have put forward a bill in large part inspired by the work of Care Champions, which looks to have a full investigation of what happened in the nursing homes during COVID and since. And unfortunately, the government is railing against having a proper investigation. They are reticent for a reason. They are reluctant strategically because they know if there's a proper investigation over what happened to the most vulnerable during COVID in nursing homes and in hospitals in this country, many of the decisions that they made will be investigated. And I've seen the Taoiseach saying, well, there shouldn't be an investigation. There should maybe be a review of what's happening. Nothing less than the truth is acceptable with related to what happened in the nursing homes in this country during COVID. Nothing less is acceptable. Because only through the truth can we find out what really happened to our loved ones and also what's necessary now to make sure that never happens again. And I'll stand with your campaign, and Aontú will stand with your campaign 100% until we get to that truth in the future. Thank you.
Ruairí Amurku, don't worry, I won't hold you very long. It's absolutely brilliant that you've brought people out. It's a pity about the day that you chose. But in fairness, it shows the commitment that people have in relation to the issues. I think everybody accepts elder care in this state has always been an afterthought. And obviously we need that safeguarding legislation, we need the frameworks. We also need to make sure that we have a proper look into the COVID period, that we look at what happened in the likes of Jalgan House in Dundalk, where 23 people sadly lost their lives. And look, those families have been absolutely brilliant, and many other families, in the sense of the piece of work that they have done. But it shouldn't be on them to carry out that level of investigative work. That should be down to the state. Stephen Donnelly, very quickly, as I say, well, at this stage, 3 years ago, nothing happens very quickly, I should say, in this state. But as I say, in 2020, he met with those families and he made promises in there, and the state spoke about a mechanism that would provide people with a means of justice, would provide them with answers, and would provide them of a means of telling their stories. And that hasn't happened yet. We have had promises made in relation to whatever, an inquiry in relation to how this state dealt with the COVID situation. But we've had no detail, we don't know what the modules are, and we don't know how we will deal with that specific part in relation to how we looked after, and in some cases how we failed our older people. And it's about making sure that we learn those lessons. And we learn the lessons that we've seen in many reports produced before by this government, and that we absolutely ensure that we put a fit-for-purpose framework and that we look after our older people properly. Look, we all know the issues that exist. We can talk about the fact how difficult it is to get home help, the fact that in some cases people are forced into nursing homes because families are left with no other circumstance. We need to learn the lessons of what we've been through. People need to be provided with a roadmap for justice, and then we have to do better. It is not beyond us in 2023 to be able to offer our citizens the rights that they deserve. So look, I am absolutely in support of yourselves. I really commend the work that you've done, and through these sort of events we need to make sure, alongside with political support, that we ensure that everything from inquiry to legislation is delivered, and that we see right by those who unfortunately did not have the rights that they should have had, and that we ensure that those into the future will have.
Before we finish, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the founder of this organisation, Magella Beatty, who is unable to be with us today due to ill health. Despite this, her exceptional advocacy and commitment and dedication to the work of Care Champions is a testament to her integrity and passion for safe care for everybody. She is an inspirational woman and a true care champion. Thank you, Magella Beatty, for your continued work for Care Champions and for all those who have died and for all those who continue to suffer in this country. You are some woman, and we salute you today. Thank you. I now hand you to Emer to close our demonstration.
First of all, I would just like to say thank you very much for everybody who joined us here today, those who are present and those who follow us on Facebook and were unable to join us in person. We do thank all those politicians and political representatives who have shown us their commitment to residents and our families and who continue to actively support us. We particularly appreciate those who remain consistently at the end of a phone with invaluable assistance and guidance. I acknowledge the families who are here today and those who have experienced harm when our broken system failed them. I would also like to just thank all of those other organisations who are represented here today. We are very grateful for your support and the support that you've given Care Champions over the past 3 years. Your advocacy and work has given us a voice when we felt we had none. Gurv Míle Mahagat.
Thank you all for your attendance. It was much appreciated, and we wish you all a safe journey home. Thank you from Care Champions.